Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. This is your host, Chris Sass, and with me is co-host Jeff McCauley. Jeff, welcome back to the program. I'm excited about
to be here,
episode.
Chris.
I'm super excited to be here today because we're going to talk solar energy, and you and I spend a lot of time talking solar energy. What are you hoping to get out of the show today? What do you want to cover today?
Well, I spend most of my time in US markets, so I'm really excited to get into more of a European perspective and perhaps a laboratory for all of the different ways that solar can be deployed.
Well, great. Let's go ahead and bring on our guest. Our guest is Andreas Thorsheim. Andreas, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. To start off, what I generally like to do is ask our guests to give a little background of who you are and what it is you do so the audience can catch up to speed where Jeff and I are.
Yes, so I'm Andreas. I'm founder and CEO of Otovo. We're a European marketplace for solar and battery installations. We're active in 13 European markets, providing solar and battery installations for homeowners. And we've been at it for 7 years. Prior to that, I worked in the tech and media industry.
Wonderful. And Andreas, can you update me, and I'm sure a lot of the audience, I'm out of date on my European solar market. So maybe even 10 years out of date, back when it was largely regulatory and feed-in tariff driven. So I gather that we are in a post-FIT world. Tell us about what that world looks like.
Yeah, so it looks like you watched the last episode in 2010, and in the heady days when feed-in tariffs were making people oversize their solar systems and feed a lot of solar energy back into the grid. That was, I guess, great news for the consumers who jumped on the bandwagon back then. It was also great news for the manufacturers who were ready and could sort of build capacity addressing demand in Spain and Germany. But that was a very, very expensive program for European governments, and things that are expensive tend to expire quite quickly. And that led to a big bust in several of the European markets. And then we hibernated for a few years, years that I think the US spent much better, creating the solar cities and Teslas, the Sunruns, the Sonovas that dominate the US market now. And we were slumbering with the exception of a few markets. There wasn't a lot of development in the resi side in Europe. But of course, with gradually increasing energy prices, with ever falling cost of equipment, the business case keeps improving, and particularly last year with the energy crisis following the Ukraine war, that has really accelerated. So now Europe is a 40 gigawatt solar market. The largest category within that is residential solar, and this is widespread, and we're catching up to make up for the lost ground compared to the US.
You mentioned in our pre-conversation that the market was good, but it seemed like prices were a bit high for solar in Europe right now. Is that still the case? Is that a result of the war and there was demand increase, or why did prices go a little bit higher in Europe?
Well, first of all, Europe is probably putting the solar panels up at half the price of what you're used to in Europe. So we're kind of in this centigrade Fahrenheit almost difference but like in in dollar terms, you probably get your solar panels up in Europe for $1.50 per watt, which is spectacularly low compared to what you're used to in the US. But even that is higher than we saw a year ago. 2022 was a year of extreme strain on the supply chains. Equipment was hard to come by, and the labor was in short supply, and that pressured prices upwards. And 2022 was a year of really a reversal of the cost declines that we've been seeing over the last decade. Now, luckily, going into this year, that's coming down again. Equipment prices are back to where they were prior to the invasion of Ukraine, and labor costs are half the way down, and will probably even out where they were before the crisis during this autumn. So we've seen a huge bump in the European cost that came as a response to extreme demand and the supply that couldn't keep up.
And then just to follow up on that, the one thing that I've seen in the US is there's been some issues with polysilicon holding orders up in customs and not getting into the US supply chain. Is Europe experiencing something similar, or is that a US phenomenon?
No, that's a US phenomenon. Europe is not taking as hard a stance towards Chinese imports and as the US. So right now, I think there's nothing holding the European market back in terms of what it can import.
Wow, $1.50 a watt. That's installed.
That's installed, yes, and in some market, like in Poland, you're going to be below $1. So
for residential,
that's an impressive market for residential. And keep in mind, like Poland is this medium-sized European country, population 40 million. They did 400,000 installations resi last year, so pretty strong market, and they're the most efficient guys on the planet, at least known to me. There's no permitting. You just smack the panels up on the roof. They put 400,000 of them up, and the grid is still standing. It's kind of moderately subsidized, and it's a country that's super motivated to get off coal power that pollutes their cities, and to get off the import of Russian gas. That's a security threat for them. So they've been really eager to get lots of solar panels up there, and it shows that when you get to volumes, you can really get the cost down. And these are efficient, serious people who can put a solar panel up on your roof and do that at less than $1 per watt installed. So it kind of a lab for the future, and I think it puts a lot of burden of proof on regulators elsewhere to show why you need to be so careful as you tend to be in other countries.
That's phenomenal. It's really amazing. I mean, for context, and we're going to get into this with some other guests, but that's 50% of the cost I'm seeing on a representative residential system in the US. And I'm guessing if there's no permitting, you're also able to do that faster from lead to close. So give us an estimate of the timeline. If you don't have interconnection, I imagine that's much faster, but how long does it take from a customer, signing a contract to when they can have electricity flowing in their house?
If you were a customer of Otovo in Poland, we were on the phone today, we'd promise you we'd install it before the end of the month. And we're recording this on July 11th. So, 3 weeks, we'd absolutely guarantee that that's up. And usually it'll take 2 weeks. It's just getting the logistics right between warehouse and the installer teams. But it's like solar and residential should be a matter of days.
But that leads me to wonder about staffing. So where do you find all these solar installers? And as the growth accelerates, so as we get more and more people doing solar, where's the workforce coming to do this installation?
Well, the solar installer community, and I think it's probably made up of tens of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses across Europe who are electricians, who are licensed solar installers. They're incredibly resourceful. They they're typically a father and son shop, or one strong guy and his 4 vans. And these people, when they see that there's increased demand, they will call up for former colleagues from the construction industry, or they'll they'll hear out the opportunity of merging with someone who's a carpenter, and they'll be recruiting here and there 5, 6, 7 guys, and that sort of adds a lot of capacity over time. And now with more recessionary fears, you're seeing the construction industries demanding less labor. Those electricians and those workers are getting freed up and are available for the energy transition. So you can get short bouts of shortage, like we saw in the winter and spring of 2022, when the demand for solar was up 2 to 3x from where it was the year before in many countries. Of course, you can't double or triple your workforce in a matter of months. But in a matter of 2 or 3 quarters, of course you can. You can call up your cousin from the countryside. You can seed new teams with your veteran and trained guys, and bring in apprentices and new guys off the street. And over a few months, these people will become also seasoned installers. So I'm really, really optimistic about the ability to get enough people into the solar industry. I know it's something that the solar energy associations, both in the US and Europe, are questioning. But I'm thinking, as long as the demand's there and we have a working pricing system, there's the opportunity to pay these people decent wages to stay safe on the roof, because there's a lot of room freed up by this ever cheaper equipment. Every time the equipment falls by 10 cents. That's 5 cents for the consumer and 5 cents for the installer to recruit more people.
This is really exciting. So again, $1.50 or less a watt installed pre-subsidy. That's not baking in other rebates or things like that. I'm still getting my head around
it. No one in the US believes us, but and the panels and the inverters, on the global markets, they'll cost 50 cents per watt. So how much do you need? How many hours can you waste putting the panels up? To me, that's the question, and it's the reason we created Otovo. Is that, okay, let's avoid the round trips while selling this. Let's only talk to people who want to talk to us. Let's have software design the systems and give people a quote before they require a person to drive to their homes. That removes a lot of waste, and then you want functioning markets without too much permitting, in which the installers can be quite certain to have a project per day or more, so that they are fully utilized and not never idling. And once you have that, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to get solar panels up for $1 per watt. And I think that's where everyone's headed. It's there are blockers in some regions. You don't have enough density of demand. Of course, in Nebraska or northern Norway, it's going to be hard to have one project on every street every day, so you can stay efficient. But bar that, there's no excuses to not get to $1.
Okay, so let's talk about financing then. Are these cash systems, loan, lease, PPA? What's the financing mechanism that's working?
In Europe, the data sets are poorer than the US, so everything's going to come off as a little anecdotal. But in general, the vast majority is direct sales, cash sales. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is that there is not really the same need for solar loans, as banks have been a bit more forward-leaning in allowing people to increase the size of their mortgages when they're doing green projects on their house. So it doesn't appear as a solar loan. It just shows up as an increase on the mortgage, and then they'll let you buy a heat pump or a solar system for that. And for the residential solar installer, it looks like cash that you earned through salary. You can't see the difference whether it was provided by the bank or salary. The second reason is that in Europe, third-party ownership leases haven't been business developed the way they have in the US. And the reason is that we had this slumber in the late 2010s and early 2020s where we didn't do as much solar, and so we didn't get the Sunruns and the Sonovas over here. Now that's changing. Otovo is providing subscription or lease products. So do some of our major German competitors, and this now represents somewhere between 1% and 3% of the European market. I think that share will grow, and I think over time the shape of the European market will look a lot more like the US one, with 25%, 30% in the lease part of the market later on.
Now, I live in Switzerland, and in Switzerland, most people don't own their home. They live in apartments, so a large percentage of the community is apartment dwellers. How does something like this work if I'm in a multi-tenant building and I want to take advantage of the solar? How are you seeing this work across Europe?
Well, the short answer is it's not working particularly well in Europe. So the majority of Europeans live in apartment buildings, and it's hard for technical and grid tariffing reasons to make that work. Now, it should be a good business case. You put solar panels on the top of an apartment building. It's never in the shade. There's no vegetation covering the panels. You can orient them towards the sun. Everything should be nice. The problem is that each apartment usually has a meter of its own, and you don't want to pull wires into every single home. You want to virtually, net meter this between the different apartments, and that's not something that's easily feasible in most countries. Now, Norway is experimenting with sort of a digital attribution model in which the grid provider would virtually allocate the solar value between the apartments. Spain lets you register several buildings within 500 meters and say that, okay, they will be virtually metered together. But this is still on a very experimental stage, and community solar and apartment solar hasn't really taken off, and we're facing some regulatory hurdles in pretty much all the countries in Europe to make that work.
Is there enough single family dwellings then that there's still a huge impact to be made then with the single family dwellings that don't have solar? Like, what percentage of those do you think are already getting solar?
Out of the detached homes with occupant owners, we're still in the single digits percentage penetration. So it's very early days. Some markets are a bit ahead. In the Netherlands, 25% of households have solar already, which is quite impressive. And if you take out the ones that are only detached homes, they're probably at almost half. So they're really pointing towards the future. But in France, you're at low single digits in the percentage of detached homes, and there's 10 million detached homes to go for. So it feels like we're very close to day one here.
This is all really exciting, and it feels like early days, as you're saying, but the trajectory here sounds very positive. What happens as we've seen solar growth in the US is that you start to get more resistance. You mentioned some political resistance to community solar. What about the posture from utilities? Do you sense that there are utilities that are starting to try to put the brakes on accelerating solar deployment?
In a way, that's what killed us in the first wave in the last episode you saw in the 2010s. But this market is at the base really well protected by the European Union. So across Europe, you have a uniform set of directives that protect the consumer's right to put solar on their roof, to feed power back into the grid, and forces the incumbent grid owners to accept that without applying unfair tariffs to the homeowner. It also bans the member countries of the EU from putting unfair taxes on inverters or feed-in. That used to be the case in the mid-2010s, where Romania, Belgium, Spain were, I think, known to have had that type of that type of taxation. So the EU is kind of the policeman, making sure that the incumbents don't get too cozy with the regulators or the utility commissions, and bans the consumers from having something that's attractive and helps them reduce their power bills. So that's kind of the common base layer here that protects the consumer and allows solar to keep growing in Europe. But then, of course, energy is always complicated. So there's ways in which you need to figure out how you split the grid costs. And there's ongoing battles about moving the billing away from energy and over to fixed rates, which is disadvantageous for solar. You're talking about taking away incentives like investment aid or reduced value-added tax. But I think in general, the political momentum is generally more positive than it's negative. So you're having some adjustments on the grid level on making rules and permitting. But in general, the European politicians are really motivated to replace imports of gas from unsavory regimes. And they've been very spooked last year. They have very ambitious decarbonization targets, and they need to do something, and solar is often the lesser of several evils. So in general, we're seeing more incentives and more help than we're seeing roadblocks. So I'd say there's reason to be positive about European politicians here.
So what I'm hearing is friendly policy to drive solar. Now, solar only happens when the sun's out, when the wind's blowing, right? Are these same folks that are putting rooftop solar in, including storage as part of it today? Is that a trend? Is that happening? Where are they at?
It's growing everywhere, but huge differences from country to country based on whether you can create a business case for the battery. And in Germany, that's certainly the case. For every kilowatt hour you can avoid buying from the grid, that's 30 cents saved. If you feed your energy back into the grid, you only make 10 cents out of it. That difference of 20 cents easily is a business case for storage. And so you see 8 out of 10 systems sold in Germany include a battery. Same goes for Italy. We're seeing Austria probably also at those levels. And then you have France, Netherlands, Norway at almost 0%, because you have such good rates when you feed back in. The market is willing to pay a lot for your surplus power, and there's not really a business case for batteries yet. But it's getting better everywhere. Increased volatility. Grid operators and regulators trying to be smart about having the solar guys pay for the grid. That generally moves value over to the storage unit, and then of course cheaper and cheaper equipment means that it's easier to create a business case for batteries. So I was very surprised by how fast batteries grew as part of our business 2 years ago. We now, on the European average, include a battery in roughly every fourth sale. So I guess that's medium numbers, and it's going to grow going forward.
And then of the batteries, I'm also seeing the trend. We're doing quite a bit of conversations on EVs these days. Are you getting pressure from your customers to leverage their EV as a battery as well? So they're doing a solar install, and are their cars getting connected to these systems?
Well, EVs are, it's already big. And, I'm recording from Oslo, Norway today. 9 out of 10 cars sold here this year so far are electric. So this is to a large degree the norm. And we're seeing the same trends as California saw, that 70% of EV owners already had PV, and we're seeing it the other way around. That it's the opposite way around, but you're having the same type of correlation. So I'd say that the EV surge is driving demand for solar, but people haven't started asking questions of how they can use this huge battery on wheels to improve the economics of solar. They're thinking that the batteries are there to charge their car, and their car isn't there to help the home yet. But I think if you see the lineup of new models for 2024, there's a lot of capability here in interacting with the home that I'm really excited about, and I think it's going to be one of the big topics for the rest of the decade.
Will that be a big transformation for a business like yours, installing solar? How does that transform your
Yes,
model?
yeah, no, I think we're very friendly with the EV charger guys, and we get leads from them. We integrate with them, and we're also looking to be cooperative towards the automotive industry, and we're having several dialogues there, where the big manufacturers in Europe are looking to partner up with players who can get their home energy gear installed, who can provide companion products to the EV and the EV charger, like batteries, solar, maybe heat pumps, maybe home management devices, and are looking for software solutions to integrate these things together. So I think there's quite a lot of sweaty business development teams in the automotive manufacturing sector that are looking for solutions here, who want a piece of the pie and are eager to move on this. So I think this is increasingly a big story going forward.
Definitely exciting. And the leadership of Europe in EV adoption, especially in Norway, we know a little bit about this thanks to Will Ferrell educating the American public in a Super Bowl commercial. Did that make the rounds over there?
Yeah. Small countries, they make sure that every time they're mentioned in the US, it goes on the national news.
There you go. One of the other areas of European leadership is around carbon pricing. How does that factor into the equation? Does that accrue to load-serving entities or the installer or the homeowner?
You don't really see it. There's been a lot of talk about it. There will probably be border adjustment mechanisms influencing the price of certain products. It's on the margin. It affects the electricity price, but it's kind of marginal compared to the other forces of supply and demand. And in 2022, 1,600 terawatt hours of power disappeared because we banned imports of Russian gas. When you're looking at changes that order of magnitude, nothing else matters. You're just seeing everything that has to contribute. So I'd say carbon pricing not a big factor in creating solar demand right now.
What about policy and regulation for construction? So whether it's a new construction, I mean, you talked about friendly tariffs, but do you see solar being legislated in as part of building code moving forward? Is that something that's happening here in Europe?
Yes, and the politicians see that as a very comfortable way to get more solar without having to pay subsidies or distort markets in any way. They can just apply it to building codes, mandate solar on new government buildings, and you're seeing this happening at the national level. The French have been eager to do that for several years. So new government buildings and new high rises need to have solar on them, and you're also seeing that in new directives from the EU that they would mandate new construction to have solar included. And I think what's going to happen is that the split you have in the solar market, where you typically think of it as utility scale, the large parks, commercial and industrial, the rooftop factory stuff, residential, the retrofit homes where we put up 10 panels or 15 panels on an existing house. Those three categories are going to have a fourth category, which is the new build category. And I'm not sure it's going to be the same players operating in that sector, because just like other things in the construction industry, those firms are going to come with their own windows, their own stairwells, their own roofing material, and their own panels, and they're going to be big buyers of equipment, but they're not going to feature on the same league tables, and they're not going to think the same way as the operators of the three other categories. And basically, they're more or less going to give those solar systems away for free, or at least included in the price of the home or the price of the building. And it's going to lead to a cheaper building to operate, to the benefit of the buyer of that building, and maybe to the bank who can give that person a bigger loan because they're able to service more debt. So I'm thinking that's going to be a fourth category for solar within a few years now.
So also, you mentioned we're at kind of the early stages. It was a small percentage of homes that have solar on it. More and more. What is the life cycle of a solar panel? So you have an installer go out, you put it on the roof. I don't know, roof has maybe a 20, 30-year life expectancy, maybe longer here in Europe because things are built to last longer here. What happens to this whole solar panel? What happens long term?
Yeah, hopefully nothing happens for a very long time. It just stays there and makes energy year in and year out until you get to the 20th year. At that point, if you're a leaser, then your lease expires and you have the choice to either hand the product back or extend your lease or upgrade to a new and futuristic super panel that we hopefully have in the 2040s. And then for a large part, these you can, and if you're not a leasing customer, you will have paid for this back in the 2020s, and you'll be happy that this darn thing still works, and it will probably keep going long beyond its guaranteed lifetime of 25 years. Maybe 30, 35 years into the future, it will start malfunctioning, and that's the time when you call Otovo again and say, I loved the product last time around when I was a young man, and now I'm an old geezer, and I'd like another hit, please. So these are extremely long-lasting things, and the manufacturers are putting a lot of effort into making them last longer. Why? Because it drives down the lifetime cost of the thing, and it means basically that the energy it produces is going to be cheaper. You pay now for something that's going to last longer, then you have more kilowatt hours to divide the cost by. So these are going to be incredibly long-lasting things, and hopefully uneventful things. Now, at the end of this life cycle, this stuff is going to come down, and in Europe now, there's a lot of focus on the recycling. I think that's a bit premature, maybe, because we're now recycling stuff from the 1990s, and there's not a whole lot of it. But of course, getting into the 2030s and 2040s, we're going to start looking at the first wave of solar being retired, and we need to do something about that. And I think the aluminium and silver in it is going to be recovered, and then the rest. Let's see what we can do with that. Hopefully, it doesn't turn into a waste problem.
So over that long life cycle, what kind of service and cleaning and who does this? Is the homeowner out there scrubbing their solar panels or putting a robot on their roof? Or is this a service that comes when they buy this kind of thing, or they buy a contract to maintain their performance of their panels?
Yeah, so I think the European climates are in general beneficial to cleaning. We have ample precipitation, and so they're kind of self-cleaning. I've had solar panels for 8 years now. I think I've removed some leaves a couple of times, but I'm never up there. There's never anything that needs to be done. And so in general, the maintenance part is almost absent. But of course, as you get into the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th year, then the likelihood that you're going to change the inverter is going to start increasing. And in leasing agreements, that's usually included as part of the lease. If you're a cash buying customer, then it's time to call up your provider and ask for a replacement part.
Let's talk about some of the life cycle on the grid regarding duck curve, or do you have a different word for it? And I believe that's starting to rear its head in Spain, probably not as much in other markets, but how is that manifesting?
No, the duck curve is alive and well, and it's deepening here. There's talk of this turning into not a duck curve, but a canyon. And I feel really good about that. This is an intellectualized phenomenon that people like to create problems around, but I think it's helpful thinking of it as a canyon. So you'll have high energy need in the morning hours, and then the sun rises, and the need for grid power energy is going to drop off a cliff, hence canyon. And then at 6-7 o'clock in the evening, the canyon rises at the other end, as you need to fire up the alternatives to solar power. Now, what happens to canyons over time? They erode and disappear. And that's what's going to happen to this canyon too. And when you look at these curves, yes, certainly they're getting deeper, but the high edges are also coming down because you're adding storage that moves the evening sun into the early night hours. And with EVs and ever cheaper batteries, we're going to just keep smashing down the evening end of the canyon very, very quickly. And I think people are underestimating how powerful solar, wind, and batteries are going to be at reducing the demand for anything but those three. And I think you're already seeing it, particularly in California, where the business case for putting up an east-facing panel is very different from what it used to be 10 years ago. You would usually just go for the best orientation southward, but now you're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to make this panel only make money in the morning, and because it's so cheap, you'll still do that. And what that means is that when you get far enough into the future, from the moment the sun gets above the horizon, it's going to hit 1 million panels. It's going to fire up the grid, and you're not going to need anything else on a sunny day. And in the evening hours, the sun is going to set on millions and millions of panels. And during the day, they will have powered up millions and millions of batteries. And we can go very far into the night and probably several days without having to get another ray of sun. And then we have our best friend wind power that's uncorrelated and usually blows more when the sun is not up. And I think this band of three, they're going to do big things. And so this duck curve, this canyon curve, it's something that we're going to laugh about as something that worried us 10, 15 years from now. We're absolutely going to smash it.
I love it. Smash the canyon, break the
canyon, break the canyon.
Yeah, I like that. We don't want to be mean to ducks, but smash the canyon or fill the canyon. So I love the optimism, and that's really encouraging. And it sounds like you acknowledge there's going to be tariff changes, maybe some time of use rates, some fixed billing, all of these with the economics and the trajectory that you're talking about today. There's room to run right through those. Based on the starting point where you're at today. And you mentioned that there's a few areas. It sounds like most of what you've talked about are areas where the US can learn from Europe. If there's one or two areas, it sounds like that might be on virtual net metering, the NEM-A, NEM-V of California, and maybe some community solar. But other than that, it sounds like there's a lot of leadership.
And financing, consumer financing of the solar panels, figuring out smart ways to construct the portfolios around this. The US is a decade or more ahead of us. So we're good at operating and building this stuff. We're not so smart about building the businesses around it. So
I'm not sure.
We have some help there.
I'm not sure. It sounds like if you're getting mortgage financing for solar and energy efficiency retrofits, that's probably ahead of the game. And yes, I'd love to claim leadership on the financing, but if a tax equity, flip PPA is costing $3 a watt and your cash deal is costing $1 a watt, I'm not sure if financing is winning. But yes, that's a nice thing. What did we miss anything? We covered a lot of ground. This is really, really phenomenal. Great insight to a lot of markets. What is the biggest thing that we didn't talk about?
Oh, I have so many rabbit holes. We could go down all of them. I think I'm very happy. I like the stuff we talked about now. It's cool. I like the compare and contrast between the US and Europe. I think. I always like that when I listen to these type of podcasts. So I enjoyed this a lot.
This was phenomenal. Andreas, thank you so much. This is really a delightful conversation.
Wonderful. Yes.
For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this content. It's been an exciting interview. If you like solar, please follow Insider's Guide to Energy. We have lots of content on solar. There's more to come. And don't forget to subscribe, follow us on Facebook as well. We'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.